The Younger Dryas changed humanity forever. Here's the evidence hidden beneath the ice. For almost a century, scientists believed they had solved the mystery. As the last ice age came to an end, enormous glaciers covering North America began melting. One of the largest freshwater lakes ever to exist, known today as Lake Agassiz, stretched across what is now parts of Canada and the northern United States. It contained more freshwater than all of today's Great Lakes combined. Researchers proposed that, at some point around 12,800 years ago, a colossal natural dam of ice collapsed. Millions of cubic kilometers of freshwater rushed into the North Atlantic Ocean. At first glance, that might not sound particularly dramatic. But Earth's climate depends on something many people have never heard of: the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, often shortened to the AMOC. Think of it as a giant conveyor belt inside the ocean. Warm water travels north from the tropics, carrying enormous amounts of heat toward Europe and the Arctic. As that water cools, it becomes denser and sinks before slowly flowing back toward the equator. This circulation helps regulate Earth's climate. Now imagine suddenly pouring an unimaginable volume of cold freshwater into that system. Freshwater is lighter than salty seawater. Instead of sinking, it remains near the surface. If enough freshwater enters the North Atlantic, the entire circulation can weaken. Less heat reaches the north. Temperatures begin falling. That hypothesis explained many of the observations remarkably well. Greenland cooled rapidly. Northern Europe became dramatically colder. Ice sheets advanced once again. For decades, this became the leading explanation for the Younger Dryas. Then, scientists began discovering evidence that didn't quite fit. Deep within sediment layers dating precisely to the beginning of the Younger Dryas, researchers found something unexpected: tiny glass-like spheres, microscopic diamonds, high concentrations of platinum, unusual levels of iridium. These weren't random discoveries. They were materials often associated with enormous cosmic impacts. The implications were staggering. In 2007, a group of researchers proposed one of the most controversial ideas in modern geology. Perhaps Earth hadn't simply experienced a sudden flood. Perhaps fragments of a giant comet had exploded above North America. Not one impact, possibly dozens. Some fragments may never have reached the ground at all. Instead, they exploded in the atmosphere with incredible force. The energy released would have dwarfed humanity's most powerful nuclear weapons. Forests could have ignited across continents. Shock waves might have traveled for hundreds of kilometers. Dust and smoke could have entered the atmosphere, blocking sunlight. Within months, the climate may have begun changing dramatically. The proposal became known as the Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis. Almost immediately, the scientific community divided. Supporters pointed toward growing evidence. Critics challenged almost every claim. This wasn't simply an academic disagreement. It became one of the most fiercely debated questions in earth science, because if the hypothesis proved correct, it would mean human beings witnessed one of the greatest natural disasters since the extinction of the dinosaurs. One of the strongest pieces of evidence came from something called the black mat. Across hundreds of archaeological sites throughout North America, researchers noticed an unusual dark layer of sediment appearing at almost exactly the same point in time. Beneath it, Ice Age ecosystems flourished. Above it, the landscape looked very different. Many extinct animals disappeared. Human cultures changed. Vegetation shifted. Supporters argued this black layer represented widespread environmental devastation following a cosmic event. Critics disagreed. They suggested the black mat could simply be the result of changing wetlands caused by climate shifts. Again, the evidence refused to provide an easy answer. Then came another surprise. Scientists working in Greenland ice cores discovered an unusual spike in platinum, precisely at the beginning of the Younger Dryas. Platinum is relatively rare in Earth's crust, yet it is much more common in certain meteorites. Similar platinum anomalies were later reported at several locations across North America and Europe. Was this finally the smoking gun? Not necessarily. Other geological processes can also concentrate platinum under specific conditions. Science demands extraordinary evidence before accepting extraordinary conclusions. That principle remains essential. Today, dozens of studies support parts of the impact hypothesis. Dozens of others reject it. Some researchers believe the evidence points strongly toward multiple airbursts from a fragmented comet. Others remain convinced freshwater disruption alone explains the climate reversal. A growing number suggest reality may lie somewhere between the two. Perhaps a cosmic event occurred, while changing ocean circulation amplified its effects. Nature rarely works through a single cause. Large events often emerge from several interconnected processes unfolding together. This uncertainty frustrates people looking for simple answers. But uncertainty is also one of science's greatest strengths. Good scientists don't defend ideas because they are exciting. They defend ideas because evidence continues supporting them. When better evidence appears, the explanation changes. That's how real discovery happens. If you've made it this far, subscribe to Unknown Discoveries. Every documentary we create separates evidence from speculation, exploring archaeology, ancient history, geology, and forgotten civilizations through careful research rather than sensational headlines. And if this documentary has already challenged something you thought you knew about Earth's past, share it with someone who loves history's greatest mysteries. While scientists continue debating exactly what caused the Younger Dryas, another mystery was quietly emerging. Across the world, human societies were changing. Communities that had survived as hunter-gatherers for tens of thousands of years suddenly began settling in one place. New forms of architecture appeared. Monumental stone structures were built. Agriculture slowly emerged. Civilization itself seemed to be awakening. Coincidence? Or could surviving one of humanity's greatest environmental crises have forced our ancestors to reinvent the way they lived? That question leads us to one of the most extraordinary archaeological sites ever discovered. A place that should never have existed. Göbekli Tepe. The Younger Dryas changed humanity forever. Here's the evidence. Imagine surviving the greatest environmental disaster your ancestors had ever witnessed. For generations, your family had followed migrating herds across open grasslands. You knew where the rivers flowed, where the seasons changed, and where food could always be found. That knowledge had been passed from one generation to the next for thousands of years. Then, almost overnight, the world became unfamiliar. The climate changed, animals disappeared, entire landscapes transformed. Everything your ancestors had relied upon suddenly became unreliable. If that happened today, governments would call it a global emergency. 12,000 years ago, humanity had only one option: adapt or disappear. For decades, archaeologists believed civilization began in a relatively simple way. People discovered farming. Farming created food surpluses. Food surpluses led to permanent villages. Villages eventually became cities. Cities gave birth to civilization. It was a neat explanation, logical, orderly. Then, in the 1990s, archaeologists uncovered something that completely disrupted that timeline. Hidden beneath a hill in southeastern Turkey lay one of the most astonishing archaeological discoveries ever made. Göbekli Tepe. At first glance, it looked like little more than broken limestone protruding from the ground. But as excavations continued, massive stone pillars emerged. Some stood over 5 meters tall. Others weighed more than 15 tons. Each had been carved with extraordinary precision. Lions, foxes, snakes, birds, wild boar, scorpions. Every surface seemed alive with intricate artwork. The dating shocked the archaeological world. Göbekli Tepe was built approximately 11,600 years ago. That made it older than Stonehenge by around 6,000 years. Older than the pyramids by roughly 7,000 years. Older than the first cities of Mesopotamia. Older than pottery. Older than writing. And, according to everything archaeologists previously believed, it should never have existed. Because the builders weren't supposed to have been farmers. They were hunter-gatherers. For generations, experts had assumed hunter-gatherers lacked the organization necessary to construct monumental architecture. Göbekli Tepe proved otherwise, somehow. Groups without metal tools, without wheels, without domesticated animals, had quarried enormous stones, transported them across difficult terrain, and erected one of the earliest known monumental religious complexes on Earth. That discovery forced archaeologists to ask an uncomfortable question: what else have we misunderstood about early humanity? Professor Klaus Schmidt, the archaeologist who led much of the excavation, proposed something revolutionary. Perhaps religion didn't emerge after civilization. Perhaps religion helped create civilization. Imagine hundreds, perhaps thousands, of people gathering seasonally around a sacred site. Someone had to provide food. Someone had to organize labor. Someone had to coordinate construction. Repeated gatherings may have encouraged people to remain in one place for longer periods. Eventually, cultivating crops nearby became more practical than constantly searching for wild food. In other words, monumental construction may have encouraged agriculture, rather than agriculture creating monumental construction. If true, that completely reverses one of history's oldest assumptions. Now place Göbekli Tepe within the timeline of the Younger Dryas. Its earliest construction begins almost immediately after the climate started stabilizing again. Could that timing be coincidence? Absolutely. Could it also suggest that surviving centuries of environmental instability encouraged entirely new ways of organizing society? Many archaeologists think that's entirely possible. When resources become unpredictable, cooperation becomes more valuable. Communities begin sharing knowledge. Planning ahead becomes essential. Storage becomes important. Seasonal gatherings become larger. Small innovations accumulate. Eventually, those innovations change history. This doesn't require a lost civilization. It doesn't require forgotten super technologies. It simply requires extraordinary human adaptability. And if there's one lesson humanity has demonstrated repeatedly throughout history, it's our remarkable ability to solve impossible problems. Yet Göbekli Tepe isn't the only site challenging traditional timelines. Across the Fertile Crescent, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of increasingly complex settlements dating to this same extraordinary period. People were experimenting, learning, building, adapting. The end of the Younger Dryas may not have created civilization overnight, but it appears to have accelerated one of the greatest transformations our species has ever experienced. Of course, not everyone agrees. Some researchers argue we're reading too much into a single archaeological site. They caution that Göbekli Tepe may represent an exceptional location rather than a global turning point. Others point out that agriculture developed gradually across different regions over thousands of years. Civilization wasn't born in a single moment, it evolved. That caution matters. History rarely changes because of one discovery. Instead, each new excavation adds another piece to an enormous puzzle. Göbekli Tepe doesn't answer every question. It asks better ones. Questions about human cooperation. Questions about belief. Questions about survival. Questions about why our ancestors suddenly began reshaping the world around them. If you're enjoying this journey into humanity's forgotten past, subscribe to Unknown Discoveries. Every documentary we produce is built on archaeology, geology, and historical research, bringing together the latest discoveries to tell the stories our ancestors left behind. And if this documentary has made you rethink the origins of civilization, let us know in the comments. Your perspective could inspire a future investigation. But perhaps the greatest mystery remains. Nearly every ancient civilization tells stories of overwhelming floods, from Mesopotamia to Greece, to India, to indigenous communities across the Americas. The same themes appear again and again. Entire worlds destroyed. Survivors beginning again. Knowledge preserved by only a few. Could these stories simply reflect humanity's shared imagination? Or could they preserve distant memories of a world forever changed by rising seas and catastrophic climate events after the Younger Dryas? The answer lies beneath the oceans, where entire prehistoric landscapes have disappeared forever. The Younger Dryas changed humanity forever. Here's the evidence: the flood that the world never forgot. Imagine standing on a coastline where your family has lived for generations. You know every river, every hill, every fishing ground. Every path your ancestors walked, then, year after year. The sea keeps coming. The shoreline retreats. Villages disappear. Forests vanish beneath the waves. Fields become marshland, eventually. The place your grandparents once called home no longer exists, not because of war, not because of disease, but because the ocean swallowed it. Today, that sounds almost unimaginable. Yet for thousands of years after the Younger Dryas ended, exactly this happened across large parts of the world. As the Great Ice Age ice sheets melted, sea levels rose by more than 120 meters. Coastlines that had existed for tens of thousands of years slowly disappeared beneath the ocean. Vast plains that once supported animals, forests, rivers, and human communities were lost forever. One of the most remarkable examples lies beneath the North Sea. Today, fishermen occasionally pull ancient bones, stone tools, and even the remains of prehistoric animals from the seabed. Those discoveries belong to a place archaeologists call Doggerland. Few people have ever heard its name. Yet thousands of years ago, Doggerland connected Britain to mainland Europe. It wasn't a narrow land bridge, it was an enormous landscape, filled with rivers, wetlands, woodlands, lakes, and countless human communities. People hunted there, raised families there, buried their dead there. Then, over many centuries, rising seas gradually consumed almost all of it. Today, its history lies hidden beneath the waves. Doggerland reminds us of something profoundly important. Our ancestors didn't simply watch climate change. They lived through it. Entire generations saw the maps of their world rewritten before their eyes. Now imagine trying to explain that experience to your grandchildren. Would you describe precise measurements of sea level rise, or would you tell a story? You might speak of a great flood, of land swallowed by the sea, of ancestors forced to flee, of a world that disappeared. That possibility has fascinated historians for generations. Across almost every continent, ancient cultures preserved traditions describing catastrophic floods. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest surviving works of literature, tells of a devastating flood sent to destroy mankind. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah builds an ark to preserve life through a global flood. Ancient Greek mythology tells of Deucalion surviving a flood that wiped out humanity. In India, the story of Manu describes divine warning before catastrophic waters arrive. Indigenous traditions throughout North and South America also preserve stories of overwhelming floods, rising waters, or dramatic environmental change. The similarities are remarkable. But similarities alone are not proof. This is where responsible history becomes essential. For many years, writers claimed these stories proved a single, worldwide flood had occurred exactly as described. Modern archaeology paints a more careful picture. There is no scientific evidence supporting one simultaneous global flood covering the entire Earth within recorded human history. However, there is overwhelming evidence that many regions experienced catastrophic flooding at different times. Lakes burst. Coastlines vanished. River systems overflowed. Massive tsunamis struck vulnerable shores. Communities living through those disasters would naturally preserve them through oral tradition. In other words, the flood stories may not describe one single event. They may preserve memories of many different catastrophes experienced by different peoples over thousands of years. That explanation is, in many ways, even more fascinating, because it suggests mythology sometimes preserves echoes of genuine human experience, not exact history, but remembered history, passed from parent to child, generation after generation. Long before writing existed, one particularly dramatic event occurred around 8,200 years ago when the enormous Turega submarine landslide off the coast of Norway triggered a gigantic tsunami. The waves swept across parts of the North Atlantic. Researchers believe they devastated coastal settlements and may have delivered the final blow to what remained of Doggerland. Imagine surviving centuries of rising seas, only to face an enormous tsunami. For the people who witnessed it, it must have felt like the end of the world. Events like these remind us that Earth's history is far more dynamic than we often imagine. Land appears permanent. Oceans appear constant. But over thousands of years, they are constantly changing. Mountains rise, rivers shift, deserts expand, coastlines disappear. Human history unfolds within that ever-changing landscape. And perhaps that is why studying the Younger Dryas matters so much. It reminds us that civilization was never guaranteed. It survived because countless generations adapted again and again to extraordinary challenges. If you've enjoyed uncovering these forgotten chapters of Earth's past, take a moment to subscribe to Unknown Discoveries. Every documentary we create combines archaeology, geology, genetics, and historical research to separate evidence from myth while exploring the greatest mysteries of human history. And if someone you know loves ancient civilizations, lost worlds, or forgotten history, share this documentary with them. It helps us continue bringing these stories to life. Yet one final question remains. What does modern science actually conclude? After decades of new discoveries, after thousands of scientific papers, after countless archaeological excavations, what do researchers believe today? Did a comet strike the Earth? Did melting glaciers alone transform the climate? Or are we only beginning to understand one of the greatest turning points in human history? The answer is more surprising than almost anyone expects. The Younger Dryas changed humanity forever. Here's the evidence, the mystery that still hasn't been solved after more than a century of research. After thousands of scientific papers, after countless archaeological excavations, the Younger Dryas remains one of the greatest mysteries in Earth's history. Not because scientists haven't searched for answers, but because nature rarely provides simple ones. Today, researchers agree on several important facts. Roughly 12,800 years ago, Earth's climate changed with extraordinary speed. Temperatures across much of the northern hemisphere fell dramatically. The cooling lasted for approximately 1,200 years. Many large Ice Age mammals disappeared during this broader period. Human societies adapted to rapidly changing environments. And shortly after the climate stabilized once again, the foundations of civilization began appearing across parts of the Near East. Those facts are supported by overwhelming evidence. The debate begins when scientists ask the next question. Why? Was it enormous quantities of fresh water pouring into the North Atlantic and disrupting global ocean circulation? Was it a fragmented comet exploding above the Earth? Could both events have worked together? Or is there another explanation we haven't yet discovered? Science has not reached a final verdict, and that's exactly how science should work. One of the greatest misconceptions about science is that it provides certainty. In reality, science provides the best explanation supported by the strongest available evidence. When new evidence appears, good scientists change their minds. That isn't weakness, it's progress. The Younger Dryas reminds us that history isn't a finished book, it's a story still being written. Every new ice core, every archaeological excavation, every underwater survey, every fossil, every improved dating technique adds another sentence to humanity's oldest chapter. Perhaps the most extraordinary lesson isn't about comets or glaciers or ancient monuments. Perhaps it's about us. Think about everything our ancestors endured. They survived an ice age. They survived dramatic climate change. They adapted as ecosystems collapsed. They witnessed coastlines disappear beneath rising seas. They watched familiar animals vanish forever. And instead of disappearing, they evolved, they experimented, they cooperated, they learned, eventually. They built villages, then towns, then cities, then civilizations. The modern world exists because countless generations refused to surrender when everything around them changed. That realization transforms the Younger Dryas from a geological event into a profoundly human story. It's a reminder that humanity has always faced uncertainty. Every generation believes its challenges are unique. Yet history tells a different story. Our ancestors repeatedly faced conditions that must have seemed impossible. Still, they adapted. One of the greatest examples of that resilience may be agriculture itself. Rather than endlessly chasing disappearing herds across unstable landscapes, People slowly began cultivating plants. Domestication followed. Permanent settlements expanded. Knowledge accumulated. Writing emerged. Civilization wasn't born from comfort. It was born from adaptation. The hardships following the end of the Ice Age may have accelerated one of the greatest transformations our species has ever experienced. And perhaps that's why this story continues to capture the imagination, not because it promises a forgotten super-civilization, not because it proves every ancient legend, but because it reveals something even more remarkable. Human beings have always been capable of extraordinary resilience. As exciting as theories about lost civilizations or cosmic catastrophes may be, the evidence tells an even more inspiring story. Our ancestors didn't possess advanced technology. They possessed extraordinary determination. Against overwhelming odds, they endured, they rebuilt, and they passed enough knowledge to future generations that thousands of years later, we are still uncovering pieces of their story. Perhaps somewhere beneath another layer of ancient sediment, or deep beneath the ocean floor, or locked inside another untouched ice core, lies the next discovery that will completely reshape our understanding of this mysterious period. History has surprised us before. It almost certainly will again. If this documentary has changed the way you think about humanity's distant past, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Unknown Discoveries. Every week, we investigate the world's greatest historical mysteries through archaeology, geology, genetics, and scientific research, separating evidence from speculation to uncover the stories history almost forgot. And if someone you know loves ancient civilizations, Ice Age mysteries, or forgotten history, share this documentary with them. You never know whose curiosity you might ignite. Before you leave, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think caused the Younger Dryas? Do you believe changing ocean currents alone explain the evidence? Could the Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis eventually be confirmed? Or do you think the real answer hasn't yet been discovered? Tell us in the comments below. I read as many of your comments as possible, and many of your ideas inspire future documentaries here on Unknown Discoveries. Because history isn't just about memorizing dates. It's about asking better questions. It's about following evidence wherever it leads. And it's about remembering that beneath every modern city, beneath every coastline, beneath every mountain, there are stories still waiting to be uncovered. The Younger Dryas reminds us that civilization was never inevitable. It was earned through resilience, through adaptation, through generations of ordinary people overcoming extraordinary challenges, and perhaps that is the greatest discovery of all. This is Unknown Discoveries. Until next time, keep questioning the past, keep following the evidence, and never stop exploring the mysteries that shaped our world. Because sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't hidden in myths. They're hidden in the evidence we've only just begun to understand.